I've been obsessed with walls and fences lately, and it appears I'm not alone. In the 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world has seen a building boom of barriers. We know about some of these. The United States is walling up its border with Mexico. Israel, in the early 2000s, started building a fence and wall barrier around the Palestinian territories. In India, India's borders with Pakistan have been fenced for a long time, and now India is working on building a fence along its entire border with Bangladesh. And over the past few years, I've traveled to these places and many more to discover what it means to live alongside a barricade. And I've been looking at a lot of barbed wire. My first impulse when I was asked to do a TED Talk about walls was to discuss the fact that all of these walls utterly fail to achieve what they were built to achieve. But when I saw that the theme of today was breaking through, I changed my mind and decided instead to tell the stories of those people that I've met throughout my wall travels who've done just that, who've broken through, who've somehow subverted and defeated the walls that stand in front of them. Now, walls are never a solution to a problem. In my opinion, they're an expression of a lack of a solution. Walls represent a failure of creativity, a failure of inspiration. It requires no inspiration, after all, to erect a wall or a fence. But the funny thing is that the walls inspire people to break through them, to tear them down. There's a great Chinese saying that says, everyone pushes a leaning fence. It's a human instinct to resist barriers. We know as children, the most delicious thing we can do is run up and touch the doorknob on a door that says, do not enter. There's something wonderful about infiltrating forbidden space. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the infiltrators that I've met during my travels. The first is a man named Geoffrey James, and I met him in Ceuta. That's up there on the left. And Ceuta, along with Melilla, are cities in North Africa on the coast, surrounded by Morocco, but that belong to Spain, their Spanish territory. As such, they represent the southernmost border of the European Union. And because of this, they're very attractive destinations for migrants from all around the world who believe that if they can just get into Ceuta and Melilla, they've made it to Europe without risking a dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean. Now, those migrants who do make it into Ceuta and Melilla immediately turn themselves in to Spanish officials and then begin the process of application for transit visas to mainland Europe, which is where they really want to be. Because of this attraction of illegal migrants, what the Spaniards have done with the often half-hearted cooperation of the Moroccans is to surround these cities with these incredibly impressive fencing systems. But Geoffrey James made it over. I met him in Ceuta. He was in a plaza. He was begging for change. And he told me how he used to wait on the wrong side of the fence, on the Moroccan side, camping out in the forest with a group of other African men. And he told me how every night they would try to get over the fence. He told me how most of the times they failed. Most of the time the Moroccan soldiers would either chase them away. Sometimes the soldiers would catch them and beat them and let them go. Sometimes they'd be detained and brought all the way over to the border with Algeria and dumped across. But every time the Africans, Geoffrey James among them, would come back to the fence and keep making attempts to get over. And Geoffrey told him about the time he made it over and how he did it. He told me how he had wrapped his hands in fabric and how he had put on as many shirts as he could find, and the thickest shirts he could find, layers and layers of shirts. And at night, when it was time to climb the barbed wire, he started going up the fence, and when a barb would snag on one of his shirts, he'd just peel it off and keep going. And it would snag him again, and he'd peel that one off too. Now, the barbed wire didn't just snag his clothing, it snagged his flesh. And he showed me the marks on his hands, or the scars on his arms from the barbed wire. But eventually, he made it over. And when he did, the Spanish soldiers that caught him, they didn't believe him that he had actually made it over the fence. The fences are impressive. And so Geoffrey James had to bring the soldiers to the fence and show them the trail of shirts going up one side of the fence and down the other side of the fence as proof that he had made it over. But for the migrants who make it into Ceuta and Melilla, climbing over the fence is only the first step. The migrants who make it have to write themselves a good story. They want to go to Europe. They need a good story. So they don new ethnicities, new nationalities, new religions even, as needed, and they shed them like thick shirts on barbed wire. For example, since the Spanish authorities won't send migrants back into a war zone or disaster zone, many claim to be from Darfur or Iraq. Migrants, they will invent stories about persecution or even torture in the places that they've come from. And some even tell stories about their sexual orientation. This is a great story I heard, was about a Nigerian man who had made it into Ceuta. And he claimed persecution in Nigeria because he was gay. He was under persecution, violent persecution for being homosexual. And so he was granted asylum into Europe based on this. And in the weeks following him being granted asylum, the word apparently had gotten out because dozens of Africans who made it into Ceuta all claimed to be gay. They all wanted to follow this guy back into Spain. Another man that I met who got over his wall, is named Mohammed Othman. He's a Palestinian. Mohammed is an activist. He travels around the world giving speaking engagements about the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And he was invited to speak in the United States, but he had to pick up his visa from the US Embassy in Jerusalem. Now, Mohammed couldn't legally go to Jerusalem because he is Palestinian. So he had to go over the fence, or the wall. And he did what a lot of Palestinians did in the early days of the wall, in the early 2000s, is he hired a Palestinian construction worker who had a crane to attach a rope to the top of the wall. So it cost about $30. So at night, Mohammed found the rope, climbed to the top of the wall, which is about 9 meters, pulled up the rope, tossed it over the other side, and then shimmied down to the other side of the wall where he had friends waiting to drive him to Jerusalem. And I imagine that the Israeli Defense Force soldiers got so sick and tired of going in the morning and seeing these ropes dangling on their side of the wall, kind of mockingly showing that someone had gone over, that they decided to build a fence on top of the wall. And I've heard rumors that fence is actually electrified. So there's an electric fence on top of a wall to stop guys like Mohammed from going over. Now, there's another way to defeat a wall rather than going over it. And that's to transform the walls into something else. And that's the domain of the artist. This is in Ramallah as well. And there was a project called Send a Message. And what you did with Send a Message is you went to the Send a Message website, you paid 30 euros, and you submitted a message. And what these Palestinian guys would do is they would spray paint your message onto the wall, take a digital photograph of it, and then email it to the recipient of your choice. It was this fantastic method of communication. And in the lifespan of the project, these guys spray painted 1,500 messages on the wall. When I heard about Send a Message, I figured that most of the messages would be political messages, messages of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. And there were many of those. However, the vast majority of those 1,500 messages were banal, everyday messages, sometimes rather silly ones. If you look at this slide here, in the middle, we have a political message. Shame on U.S. government for paying for this atrocity. Californians love Palestine. And that's flanked with an ad for a sports radio station in Washington to the right. And to the left is the word bushy, which I'm not sure if it's a political statement. I'm not sure what that means, but it's kind of ridiculous. And marriage proposals were very popular for Send a Message. Faris was telling me that they had something like a half dozen people proposed by spraying their proposal onto the West Bank wall. So what Send a Message is doing is they're defeating the wall. They're transforming this kind of ominous military structure into something more akin to a bathroom wall, where any of us can scrawl whatever we want, any sort of for a good time call messages. The wall is still made out of concrete. There's still barbed wire all around it. But Send a Message robs it of its emotional power. And so the wall becomes less than it was before. Now, this is the wall that separates Nogales, Arizona from Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. And we'll see if the sound works. This is what the wall sounds like. Now, Glenn White plays the wall. He hammers it with drumsticks and little wire whisks. He bows it with a cello bow. And he attaches contact microphone to it, wires it to compression pedals, and then into a speaker and a recording device. And he creates these very strange, he calls it music, but it's more this kind of whining, moaning, metallic noise that he comes out of these things. It's his border ephemera project. He calls it Sonicanta. Now, what Glenn figures he's doing here is he's transforming something incredibly ugly. These walls, by the way, are built with leftover helicopter landing mats from the first Gulf War. So he transforms the wall into something ugly, into something beautiful. This music that he finds beautiful. I met Glenn in Arizona. We actually played a duet on the wall. He was telling me about his project. And the most interesting thing about it, I think, is that when he explained that sonically, the wall does not discern Mexico from America. It vibrates and resonates with sounds on both sides of the border. The wall does not know here from there. And so, in this way, the wall becomes a unifier rather than a divider. And Glenn's music shows that. And by showing that, it subverts the idea of the wall altogether. Now, as a side note, as we speak, this wall in Nogales is coming down and being replaced by something like bollard pipe walls. And there's a great clip on Glenn's website where he talks to some of these construction guys building the new wall, and he actually asks them, hey, has anyone considered what this new wall is going to sound like? And there's this fantastic awkward silence with this government construction worker. In conclusion, walling is a human impulse. The ancient Chinese did it. The ancient Romans did it. The builders of gated communities built them. But I have to believe that the creative spirit is a stronger force. Eventually, what wins out is not the crude impulse to wall, but the creative impulse to break through. It is, in the Old Testament, after all, it was the musicians, the trumpet players, who finally brought down the walls of Jericho. The walls will continue to rise, but we will continue to tear them down. Where there is a wall, there is a will, and there is a way through. Thank you.